On this week's podcast, Paul and I are going to be doing a skit for you. We are going to reenact a very common fight Paul and I have seen in our own spouses' arguments. Hopefully, it'll be a little bit fun. We'll pick out the points of contention. As I've always thought, relationships is more about conflict resolution than compatibility and all values and stuff like that. How about it, Paul? You want to take on Sam and I'll take on the gal?
I think this might be the gal. It's a very gender neutral name.
And again, like we didn't make this on our own. We're stealing this from the Gottman Institute. They have a great newsletter. If you're looking for something to throw into your email newsletter, you can sign up for polls. And if you're more in investing, you can sign up for mine. But if you're looking for more exclusive relationship help, the Gottman Institute's a great newsletter. But let me get into character here. All right, I'm Sam. I can't believe you showed up late to my work dinner. You embarrassed me in front of everybody.
I didn't mean to show up late. I had something come up at work and I had to address.
You didn't even text or call that you were going to be late. I look so stupid when people ask me where you were. I don't want people at work to think that I'm stuck waiting around for you. You always do this to me. You don't care about how I feel.
I have a career I need to focus on as well.
This isn't about you. I'll let you go first, but I'll point out what the Gottman Institute talks about here. So Sam approaches Jordan with strong emotions of anger, which is the yelling, and then frustration of you don't listen, and then the criticism of you always, you never. Jordan tries to explain his point of view without first acknowledging Sam's feelings. What are a couple of things that you see when you go through this, and it probably makes you chuckle a little bit because it's pretty standard for everybody.
Even though it's a very short skit, I believe there's so much here. Even though it's just a few lines, it definitely resonates with me, some of the fights that my wife and I had, and a lot to unpack, even though it's a very short skit.
Yeah, I'll go in the second line. The first line, right?
Yeah.
When Sam's kind of, it essentially starts with a pretty innocent statement. I can't believe you showed up late to my work dinner late. In a way, it can be construed as a little bit offensive, but as soon as they say that, Jordan comes through and is pretty defensive, right? And then we're off to the races there.
Correct. So for example, you embarrassed me in front of everyone, right? When you start off with something like you, oftentimes that is an attack. Even though it might not seem that bad, it is a criticism.
You'll be proud of this. My wife today gave me a you statement through text and then followed it up with we and asterisks. We talk about this stuff. Yeah. One little tip is changing the words use to we's to make it taking the edge off of it just a tad.
Yeah, great tip. Another tip, besides using the we, which is great because you're putting it in the context of a team, but another great alternative for like you or pointing the finger is using an I feel statement. So this is going into that whole idea of expressing how you feel, right? Because when you express how you feel, it's difficult to argue with that. If you say, I feel embarrassed or even I feel angry, much harder to find fault with that than to be attacking somebody.
But yeah, that tactic is so powerful. A lot of times that just stops things. If you see the second exchange, you can see how it escalates because obviously what's happening during a fight, but like when you really get into it, the first person doesn't feel like the other person cares or validates their feelings. And I think especially for men, this is very common where men hide their feelings and emotions and needs. And they don't say things like, I feel this, because that's just traditionally not what guys do. So I think sometimes we see this when our friends tell us about their fights and it could just been stopped by pausing and I feel this and then see where that goes.
Correct. So because my wife and I have also gone through the Gottman method. So if we witness a couple arguing or colleagues arguing, we'll chuckle at each other because we'll immediately pick up on the 4 horsemen, right? We did a couple episodes on these. So what's a criticism? Defensiveness. What is contempt? Like what's stonewalling? So we give each other a glance and we chuckle because we're like, oh boy.
My wife doesn't do that with me. I just do that with myself. In that third exchange, there was criticism that popped up. And I'm sure you were like, oh, shoot, it's on, right?
Yeah, it's on. It's on because the first thing we're assuming is a guy here, he did, which is I didn't mean to show up late, but I had something come up at work that I had to address. That's classic defense. Again, that's in response to an attack, right? Someone's said, I can't believe you didn't show up. Like you embarrassed me in front of everyone. Then the natural reaction is defensiveness. Oftentimes there's usually a but in there. I didn't mean to show up late, but I had something come up at work that I had to address. But a big word because it almost negates what you said before. It's almost saying my needs come first in a way. And then that ramps it up. This is when Sam starts to yell, she just attacks even more, right? The very common scenario, very common situation that we see.
Yeah. Almost it should be like a drinking game when you hear the word you and
Mhm.
but. Those are the two words. I agree with you, but I think what it also does is if I were to apologize for something, normally when you apologize, you just let it sink in. But when you add in that but, it's
Mhm.
just moving on, right? It kind of
Yeah,
negates that accountability or that
correct.
apologies and just is another reason why that but is such a hot
Yeah.
buzzword there.
It's almost avoiding taking responsibility. And it's oftentimes the reason why fights just escalate. And you mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, it's not just couples. This is very applicable to colleagues at work, other types of relationships where there are some stakes at play.
And then the criticism they end with, you always do this to me. You don't care about how I feel. That's
Yeah.
another one of the four horsemen. I
Hmm.
actually got a story for that. We were
Yeah.
at the San Diego Zoo. The pandas came back
Oh,
and then
nice.
we're waiting in line. And then there's a couple behind us. Somebody made a joke and the spouse was like, no, he's fat or something like that. I was like, oh boy, it was friendly, but it's criticism,
Yeah.
right? What does Gottman say? Like with 90 something percent, they put people in a room,
Mhm.
watch them, and look for things like that. And that would have just been a tally in that criticism mark. And then they're supposedly able to predict divorces pretty strongly. But when you're listening for these types of things, it's pretty funny when you see it out there.
Especially if we used to do a lot more of it than we do now. And we can sort of chuckle at it because we've gone through the process of practice and training not to do this stuff because this stuff is poison for relationships. Yeah, unfortunately. It's why so many relationships start out great and then over time it just devolves. Yeah.
Yeah, you brought up one thing. I guess this could happen with your friends or
Mhm.
coworkers, but I think the reason why it's so diabolical
Mhm.
with your romantic partner is you said it in the beginning. There was an offer out there. The first person said, I can't believe you showed up to my work dinner late. You embarrassed me in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That should have been an I feel statement, right? I feel hurt and I don't know, abandoned, whatever. And that's how you're supposed to do it, but it can up the ante,
Mhm.
right? You put yourself out there, you do everything that you're supposed to do. In this scenario, the person didn't do that. If the person just bulldozes and goes past it, it can escalate even more. Somebody
Mhm.
who's aware of starts with that I feel statement. I'm sure your spouse has sometime said, F you, I'm not going to acknowledge your I feel statement. And then it just gets worse.
It takes two to tango. This is where it's really helpful for both partners to be familiar with techniques on how to handle disagreement, right? Like in a group setting, a team setting, and a work setting. If you have one person in like a group at work who is completely insensitive, self-centered, and doesn't care, it's going to be difficult, right? You can use all the I feel and do everything right, but it may not be that effective.
And just when it's like a simple one-on-one romantic relationship,
Yeah.
it makes sense why people don't do the I feel statement when they start off because more times than not, people just are not aware of this stuff and
Yeah.
they just steamroll. And I can see where it's exposing an open wound and then the
Mhm.
other person just throws salt into it.
The natural reaction is to protect yourself, right? You're in this fight or flight mode and you're angry. It's totally natural. It does take training and some mindfulness to remind yourself, okay, start with an I feel statement instead of attacking your partner. Yeah.
All this is all too common. I
Yeah.
wonder how not more than
Mhm.
70% of people get divorced, right? But
Yeah.
perhaps there's always one person in a relationship that just takes it
Mm.
for the team all the time, which is a little sad. But
Yeah, it's not healthy because some people just take it, but everything festers and it's going to reveal itself in one way or another. And you probably don't want to be around when things blow up.
probably better off being alone than in something like that. I also look at this where both of these people here they're just not aware, and that's what's difficult.
And I need to have compassion for them because they're just responding, right? to the other. And it's very natural, right? So had kind of started off with, for example, I felt really embarrassed when I had to answer your questions about where you were, then that probably would lead to a very different response from Jordan, right? Probably he's more likely to say something like, oh, okay, I can see why you felt embarrassed. Probably would have felt the same way if I was in your shoes.
This is what's hard when you don't have very good momentum and awareness on both sides. It's tough. But maybe Sam could have said something like, "Hey, I'm gonna tell you how I feel. I just
Mhm.
don't want you to respond right away because I can already see how Jordan is getting defensive." And that's what's hard when you're not good at this. It's hard to have that momentum and both people being on the same page.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And then, that this line where Sam goes, "You always do this to me. You don't care about how I feel." Again, it's a lot of like you can almost picture the finger pointing going on and then the generalization, right? You don't care about how I feel. You always do this to me. Again, that's a common sort of criticism tactic and oftentimes will lead to the other person being defensive. If he or she feels flooded, that can end up in stonewalling because the person is feeling too attacked and too flooded.
And they're criticizing their inner core of the person, and
Mhm.
then why do you even with me if that's what you feel?
Yes. Yeah, and this it's tough. You're in the heat of the moment, but instead of saying, "You always do this to me," you just don't care about how I feel. A better, more healthy way would be something like, "I've noticed this has happened before, and it makes me feel like my events aren't a priority. Can we find a way to prevent this from happening?" Again, that's looking for a solution or some sort of commonality, right? Instead of like throwing out these bombs, like you're just attacking the other.
One last bonus round question. There's people that are like in one or two camps of if something like this comes up and it escalates a bit, do you talk about it before going to bed or deal with it in the morning in cooler heads? What camp are you in?
I think it depends on the person. I know that statistically, men's physiology is usually slower than women's to go back to baseline, right? And then there's anthropological reasons why that is the case, right?
So the guy is gonna hold a grudge longer? Is that what you're saying?
Their fight or flight response is going to be more triggered, more heightened for longer, right? If you go back thousands of years, that was probably advantageous because if you saw a tiger in the wild, you probably need to be vigilant for a long period of time, waiting in the bushes, trying to hunt your food and whatnot. You don't want that if you're at home, like tending to the hearth, where you're in this hypervigilant state for an extended period of time. This is a generalization between men and women. If you've had any sort of PTSD or traumatic events in your past, this will affect things. If you've had a history of abuse, trauma, then your fight or flight responses can oftentimes be heightened because of that. And that'll come into play when you're in these types of fights. If you're dealing with somebody like that, that person might actually benefit from a cooling off period, right? Like almost taking a time out, saying to the other person, "Hey, can we take a few minutes? I just need to cool down. I want to talk about this, but can we cool down? And then we'll talk about it." Right? If someone has a nervous system where it's very easily triggered for a long time, then that might be a time where you might want to wait until the morning for things to cool off. Yeah. So it might not even be possible to try to go to bed, not upset at each other and try to resolve this. It all depends on the person and their circumstances.
Who knows? My gut tells me that they should just hunt till the morning time
Yeah.
when things are less there. One of these two parties is probably going to want to resolve the damn thing now, which is going to
Yeah.
create some conflict.
One partner might actually try to make a repair attempt when Jordan says, "Oh, that's not true. I have a career that I need to focus on as well." A better alternative would have been, okay, take some responsibility. That's what we talked about before. Try to infuse a repair attempt, right? So that could look like a response like, "No, I'm sorry. I didn't let you know earlier. I should have sent a quick text. Can we find a better way to communicate in situations like this?" That's far better than saying, "That's not true." Taking responsibility, it's a bid for connection. It is also an attempt to repair. And it's extending this bridge, right, to try to communicate and try to work things out in the future. It's also showing the other person that you care about this relationship and you want this relationship to work out.
I might be reading a little bit too much into this since it's only the third line
Yeah.
exchange, but I have a career I need to focus on. It seems like some kind of bigger, overarching, or unresolvable issue. Maybe
Mm.
one went back to work, one doesn't. Something like that. It's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
one of those things going on.
There's often so much that is conveyed in a single sentence. It could really hide a lot of emotions and a lot of pent up feelings and thoughts.
It's such a sterile textbook
Mm.
example here, but there's so much natural things going on that you could actually see happen in real life.
Oh, totally. Within intimate partners, it's rarely just the words. Behind the words, which I call level one, there's a lot of emotions, right? And then behind the emotions is like the history, all the baggage, the trauma. But we can dig and find a lot of meaning to this.
My final comments are to just the takeaways is be careful of the you words, turn it into we if you can, and
Yeah.
watch the criticism. Pretty standard argument here.
Very standard. Yeah, we see this all the time. It always starts small, right? But I think part of why the divorce rate and separation rate is so high nowadays is these conflict resolution techniques. Nobody teaches us this stuff, right? They don't teach us in school. Oftentimes, we might not have witnessed our own parents have the most ideal ways of arguing with each other. Right? So we pick this up from our parents, those around us. So very few role models, which is why I love the Gottman method because it is scientifically based, right? They've observed thousands of couples and with the four horsemen, they narrowed it down to these four top predictors of in figuring out is a couple going to make it or not. That's pretty darn remarkable, right? To narrow down to four things. Right? So I would say if anyone cares about their relationships, what better investment could you make in your life than to study up on this stuff or at least learn it, right? And learn some new skills. Yeah, because it's going to affect all areas of your life.
With that, we'll close this week's podcast. Maybe this might be one to share with your spouse. We tried to do today is look at it from a third party. And that way, maybe if you do share it, you guys can both look at it when feelings are down. You can look at it from more of a comedic standpoint. At least you're coming from the combined viewpoint or shared experience.
The goal is really to reach mutual understanding. Ultimately, if you're able to use these conflicts and reframe them as opportunities to actually build closer connections, that's what's possible, right? Fights are not inherently bad. Fights are inherently bad if they're not resolved in a good way. But oftentimes, fights and conflicts are just amazing opportunities to actually become closer to one another and find common ground and achieve things that you didn't think were possible.
Well said. If you guys got value of that, please go and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel and then leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you guys next time.
See you guys.
Bye.